I studied French for over 10 years. I even got a degree in it. I worked hard, I was good at grammar, and I had quite a lot of vocabulary. But when it actually came to speaking to a real French person, I froze. I could understand everything they were saying, but I couldn't speak at all. It didn't matter how many hours of studying French I had done, I knew all the grammar rules, but none of that mattered because I wasn't able to put it all together and speak fluent French. If you're having the same struggles, don't worry, I learned French for 10 years completely the wrong way. And what finally worked wasn't a specific app, nor a textbook, nor any particular grammar rule. It was one shift, one technique that changed everything for me. In this video, I'm going to break down how I went from knowing all the French knowledge possible, but being hardly able to speak French at all, to speaking French fluently, communicating with native speakers, easily using everyday expressions and no longer stumbling over my words. And I'm going to show you how you can achieve this too. For a bit of backstory, I started learning French when I was 12 years old. So I've now been learning French for 13 years. I even went to university to study a degree in it, and I thought I would become fluent after that, but turns out doing a university degree in French doesn't make you fluent in French. I spent years memorizing all the conjugations, all the tenses, all the different grammar points, because I thought that if I studied harder, I would be able to speak better French. And that is actually not the case, because speaking is a completely different skill to writing, for example. Despite the years of studying, I couldn't answer simple questions without freezing on the spot. My mind would go blank and I wouldn't remember any French, even though I had been studying it for so long. The most frustrating part was I got to a point where I could understand everything in French, everything a native speaker was saying, movies, videos on YouTube, podcasts, but I couldn't actually produce the language myself, or if I did, it was very slow and disjointed. And this became more apparent when I moved to France 3.5 years ago, and I had real difficulty expressing myself in fluent French. I was lacking everyday expressions, I didn't know how to respond to people, I took too long thinking about how to formulate the perfect sentence. I was also really embarrassed about my accent, which we'll come on to later, but ultimately I was lacking a whole set of skills to be able to speak French fluently. Don't worry if you're also at this stage where you've learned everything there is to learn in French. You know quite a lot of vocabulary, expressions, grammar rules, but you can't put them together and speak fluent sentences. I'm going to tell you exactly why. We have been taught French wrong. We've been told to memorize conjugation lists. Apps like Duolingo also are not helpful. You feel like you're learning French, but in reality they're just memory tests, and if you have a very good memory like me, sometimes you can think that you're learning French and becoming better in French, but ultimately you're just accurately remembering the things that you've memorized. And whilst you might be at the level where you can order a simple coffee in a cafe, for example, trying to explain how your day went, any problems you faced, and responding to questions asked by other people can be very, very difficult when you haven't got the skills to speak French fluently. Ultimately, the school system and language apps set you up for being able to recognize French. That's probably why you can understand everything and you can read everything, but they don't promote the use of it, the actual production of the French language, and that is so, so important, as that is a vital tool for communicating in French and not being passive, but actually actively expressing opinions, emotions, and being able to effectively communicate with native speakers in real life situations. When I first moved to France, I was lacking everyday expressions, and you probably are too. So how do we get over this problem of not being able to speak French fluently and just being stuck in freeze mode on the spot when somebody asks you a question? The answer is you have to speak more than ever. You have to stop learning the grammar rules, stop learning the vocabulary. Even though you always feel like you don't know it all, that's absolutely fine. What you need to start prioritizing is speaking, and actively speaking on an everyday basis, forcing yourself to be in that uncomfortable situation where you're on the spot and your mind's gone blank and you're just pausing, these massive pauses that feel like they're about 5 minutes long when actually they're only about 5 seconds long, because you're trying to remember the word that you want, or you're trying to remember how to say something correctly. You have to actually go through the motions of speaking badly to be able to speak good French. And I actually avoided speaking French for a long time because I was afraid of making mistakes in front of native speakers. I was also really embarrassed about my accent, but you just have to forget about that. You are going to be speaking messily. It's going to be sounding bad. You're going to be embarrassed. Your accent probably won't be the best at first, but practice makes perfect. And don't make the mistake I made, which was shying away from speaking for a very long time out of embarrassment, fear of getting it wrong, and hoping one day that you were just going to suddenly magically be able to speak great French once you have done all the reading and the learning. But ultimately that's never going to be the case. It's a skill that has to be worked on, just like going to the gym and working your muscles. You actually have to go through the motions of speaking and making the mistakes, because that's how you learn. Having Having as many conversations with people in French as you can is so important, because that's how real fluency is built. Being put on the spot and having to navigate real life situations in French is going to force your brain to have to actively recall the information, the vocabulary, the expressions that you've learned in your brain. And that's the skill that needs training to be able to speak fluent French. It's the active recall that's the problem. That's why you're having those big pauses. You're stumbling over your words. Don't worry, I did that so many times, and it's very embarrassing, especially in front of native French speakers when they're just standing there waiting for you to get your words out. But that is how we all learn. And if you think about when you're stood with someone speaking your native language, if it's English or another language, you're not judging them, you're not laughing at them, you even try to help them. That's what I found, was a lot of French people would actually fill in the sentences for me and give me the vocabulary or the words that I needed, make kind little corrections if there were any. And actually people are very understanding and patient. It's just the pressure that we put on ourselves to be perfect, and we think we're making a fool of ourselves and it's really embarrassing, but it's actually not. And it becomes less embarrassing over time. The more you force yourself to do it, the better you get. You become more confident. At first I was really shy and I was sort of speaking like this, not looking at anyone. But actually, if you open yourself up, posture is everything as well, and speak with confidence and articulate the words to the best of your ability. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. It doesn't matter about your accent. It's just about the fact that you're trying and actively trying to improve. Finding time and the opportunities to speak French in your everyday life is going to be so important, because it forces you to make yourself understood by others. Even if you're lacking vocabulary, lacking expressions, you have to find another way of saying something. That's happened to me countless times, where I know exactly what I want to say in English, but I don't know the word in French or the expression in French, and I end up having to go around this long windy path of explaining round the word that I'm missing. And all that work is going to be so good for building your fluency in French and being able to communicate effectively. It doesn't matter that you're missing that word, as long as you can explain what you mean. Then the other person can say, oh yeah, actually you mean this, and you're like, oh yes, I do actually, and then you can remember that word for next time. So finding another way of saying things in French, and not just avoiding speaking because you don't know how to say something, is very important. The skill of rephrasing things and being able to put across concepts using the vocabulary and the expressions you know, even if those are limited, is going to be so beneficial for improving your French fluency long term. Actively speaking French on an everyday basis is also going to help you think in French. This is so important, that we get out of the habit of translating everything in our head into English or whatever your mother tongue is, because that is slowing us down. It's all about mental speed when you're recalling things on the spot and being able to communicate effectively with people. The end goal is really to have your whole world in French and not just be translating every single word every time you want to speak. And it is very difficult to do that, and it's something that takes time. It's not going to happen straight away. An easy way to get started is when you learn a piece of vocabulary. For example, le lit means the bed, but instead of thinking to yourself, oh yes, that means bed, you actually visualize a bed. So this can be for anything around your home that you can look at. So for example, you see your oven, un four. When you say the word four, you directly think about the physical oven and not the word oven in English. Once that becomes too easy, you can then move to the next stage, which would be thinking about concepts in French. So what I mean by that is, il est malade, he's sick. You wouldn't think, oh, that translates to he's sick. You would actually visualize someone who is ill. It's going to help you speak French a lot more fluently, because you're not having this pause where you're thinking about what that means in English, or vice versa. You've thought about it in English, then you've got to translate it into French before you actually say it. That's where people are being slowed down and having this awkward, disjointed conversation with someone with these big pauses, and it all feels really awkward and embarrassing because you are taking too long to recall the information. But if you've got this whole world of French in your head where you've associated French words and expressions with actual real life objects and concepts, it's going to be a lot easier to become fluent in French. The one technique that changed everything for me and really accelerated my progress in speaking French was focusing on everyday expressions. So what I mean by that is things like j'en ai marre, tu m'étonnes. These are all everyday expressions that French people use, and the secret is to know how to use them in real life conversations. So you want to agree with someone, you say ah oui c'est sûr. Those are expressions that you might not have heard of before, or if you have, you don't know how to use them. But knowing how to use everyday expressions in real life conversations and knowing how to respond to people is going to be so beneficial for your French fluency, because you're going to progress a lot quicker and you're going to start sounding more natural and less robotic. For example, if someone announces some really great news and you want to say, oh, that's really great, you can say tant mieux. And it's just little subtleties like that that are going to help you become more fluent in French, because you're going to be responding to people with everyday French phrases that native speakers use. It's just about learning when to use which phrase and in which context, and that just comes with time, learning how people often respond to different things, focusing on everyday expressions, how to use them and how to respond to people depending on the context is going to be really helpful when trying to speak French more fluently. So how did I get better at speaking French before moving to France? Because obviously moving to France is the easiest thing to do in terms of improving your French speaking. You're thrown in at the deep end, you're forced to communicate with people and hear French every single day, but I know that's not always feasible for everyone. So the first thing I did in preparation for moving to France was I spoke to myself out loud every day. I narrated what I did. If I said, I'm going to do the washing up, je vais faire la vaisselle. I also used to describe my surroundings. If I was outside, what could I see in front of me? For example, I can see a green tree. Je peux voir un arbre vert. And it's just getting used to being able to produce the language. You're not having the pressure of having someone in front of you who's listening and waiting for you to respond. You can actually produce the language of your own accord, get better at recalling things. It's an easier way to get started with French fluency if having a conversation with someone is A, maybe not possible for you at the moment with your level, or B, you find it too embarrassing, too intimidating. Start by just talking out loud to yourself. If you want to improve your spontaneity, if speaking to yourself is becoming too easy, you can always voice note yourself. I started doing this as well because it just adds that element of pressure that mimics a real life situation where you're having a conversation with someone and someone is there waiting for your response and you actually have to produce the language on the spot. Recording yourself, whether it's a video, whether it's a voice note simply, is a great way of recreating that pressure that often makes a lot of people crumble when they're trying to speak French fluently in a real life situation. I know that happened to me a lot. I could happily speak to myself, but as soon as there was pressure, someone was there in front of me waiting for my answer, I completely lost my train of thought. I let the pressure get to me. And so that's something that you have to train as well, is the spontaneity aspect, being able to recall things with the pressure of having to say it on the spot. Don't worry, at first it's going to be really difficult. It was for me, and there's so many voice notes and recordings I've got of myself where there's just these big long gaps, but you have to just keep going, and every day those gaps will get less and less and you will become more fluent. You will start saying maybe little phrases all in one go, and then there'll be a pause, and then after that eventually there'll be whole sentences before there's a pause. It really does take time and you have to be patient with yourself, but the key is speaking every single day, not just for 1 hour per week and then that's it. It's not really about the number of hours per week that you're speaking for, but rather the frequency. It's better to do 10 minutes a day every day than do 1 or 2 hours per week. It's also a really good idea when you're watching YouTube videos or films just to put it on pause and try to repeat the sentences that they've just said. That's a great way of modeling intonation, because that's something that a lot of people get wrong and can hold them back in becoming fluent in French, is if they've got completely the wrong intonation. Is a great way of improving your pronunciation, because you can try and copy what they've said, how they've said it, and then when you feel a bit more confident, you can move on to reading aloud from books, and that just helps you practice forming the words in your mouth. Because if you're like me and you've avoided speaking for a long time, it's going to be difficult to actually form the different sounds in your mouth correctly, and the words are going to feel really awkward to pronounce, and that as well is probably slowing you down. You can also improve your fluency in French by focusing on expressions that you didn't learn in school. A lot of people make the mistake of saying je voudrais when they are ordering in a cafe or a restaurant, but actually if you come to France you'll realize nobody orders with je voudrais, they order with je prendrai or je vais prendre. Little subtleties like that are going to help you sound more natural and more like a native speaker, rather than a French learner that's just learned out of a book. Ah yeah, that means I would like, so I'm going to order with that expression, when actually nobody in France uses that. Learning sentence starters is also a really good way of being able to introduce conversations, because once you're able to answer people's questions, the next problem I had, and you might have as well, is that it's actually really difficult to initiate a conversation in a foreign language, so specifically in this case French. You maybe can't think of what to say or how to start conversations pronunciations, and that really does come with practice and with time. But in order to get better at that and improve your French fluency, I would recommend rehearsing some conversation starters. So for example, you want to introduce the fact that you have had a bad day and you have been having all these problems and you want to say what they are. You could say something like "Aujourd'hui, il m'arrive que des problèmes," which is a bit dramatic, but that's really how French people speak. And so if you can get in the habit of using expressions like that, they're good ways of kind of introducing things that you can then describe and talk about. Of course, this depends on your level. If you're not quite there yet, that's absolutely fine. And another great way of improving your French fluency is modeling expressions used by native speakers. So if you're not in France and you can't listen to native speakers in real life, then perhaps you can find them online, tutors, people on language apps that are happy to help you improve your French speaking, or otherwise just use YouTube videos or films to really try to pick up expressions that people are using in everyday situations. You want to not only write them down and memorize them, but more importantly, you want to actively say them and try and find opportunities during your day where they would fit in nicely and you can practice using them, because it's through that production of language that you're going to become more confident with expressing yourself in French. And honestly, don't worry if your pronunciation is really bad. Mine was really bad, but what is actually more important is when you're speaking, try to be aware of how you're pronouncing things wrong. Maybe you had the wrong intonation, and this is going to be a bit difficult at the beginning because you don't really know that you're saying it wrong. But the more you practice, the more you listen to native speakers and model what they're saying. And also with the help of French phonetics, if you don't have a good basis and knowledge of French phonetics, I would definitely recommend studying French phonetics, knowing the difference between the nasal sounds en and on. For example, the difference between angle and ongle. They are very subtle. A lot of French learners will just merge them together and say en, on for both, but they have a different sound, and being able to distinguish between these different nasal vowels is going to set you apart and help you sound a lot more fluent in French. Another common mix-up that is good to be aware of is the difference between tu and tout. A lot of people will just mix it up and just say tu for everything, and that is wrong. So if you're able to be aware over time of your mistakes and how to correct them, then that's going to stand you in really good stead for making great progress in speaking French. And don't worry, you're going to get it wrong 100 times before you get it right. That happened to me. Even today, it's very difficult for me to pronounce the R in French. It doesn't come naturally at all. Words like fenêtre and trois are very difficult. I feel like I maybe overdo the R slightly, but ultimately you're never going to sound perfect. And the sooner you let go of this idea of wanting to sound perfect in French, the easier it becomes to let yourself make the mistakes. As long as you're learning how to improve them and you're actively trying to get better, it doesn't matter, and it's normal to make mistakes, and that's how everybody learns. You shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of how you speak French, because everyone starts somewhere and it just takes time and practice to get better. So if all the recommendations I've given you to start speaking sound quite overwhelming, your level is not up to that, I would just recommend, even if you're in the very beginning stages of learning French, i.e. you only know certain pieces of vocabulary, you can count, maybe you can't even form whole phrases or sentences, I would be speaking from day one, just like a child, just pronouncing words out loud, even if it's just one word. Let's say today is Sunday, for example, you say dimanche, or you practice saying a whole phrase, aujourd'hui nous sommes dimanche. And notice how I said nous sommes dimanche and not c'est dimanche. And that's very important, getting familiar with the expressions that French people actually use. They don't say literally it is Sunday, they say we are Sunday. And that's something that is very important, that takes some time, some studying. You can find these things online. You can also listen to French native speakers and pick it up as you go along. That's how I did it when I moved to France. But you can also pick up these things slowly by having lots of contact with different forms of French media, as well as native speakers online or tutors, whatever you have access to. So if you felt stuck speaking French and you think you're never going to become fluent and it's feeling very frustrating, don't worry, I've been there. But using this one shift of prioritizing speaking and actively producing the language, making the mistakes and kind of failing forward, as it were, is going to be the key to French fluency. So put down the conjugation tables, put down the grammar books, put down the dictionary, and stop learning the vocabulary words and start actively speaking. Focus on everyday expressions that French native speakers use. Associate French vocabulary with objects rather than translated words in your head. And although the progress might be slow, with these techniques that I've given you, you can skip wasting 10 years like I did, and with with the hard work, patience, and consistency of speaking French every day, you will soon become fluent. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has been useful. Let me know in the comments what stage of French learning you're at. If you've moved to France, how are you finding it? Or if you're planning to move to France, or why you started learning French in the first place. I would love to know. Also, let me know any other videos you would like to see.